I've started too many of these scripts with "this needs no introduction," but I mean, it's fucking Star Wars. It's inescapable. It has been for 40 years, and I just want it to end. But today, we're gonna go back those 40 years to a simpler time. A time before merchandising, comics, prequels, sequels, spin-offs, television series, cartoons, cereal, bags of fucking lettuce. To a little movie called Star Wars. Not A New Hope, just called Star Wars. This plucky little movie broke everything, made movies big business over art, advanced special effects by years, and captured audiences' hearts. Star Wars released to the extremely early era of video games, a few Atari home computer and arcade games, a Japanese exclusive Famicom game, and mostly forgotten adaptations of the first two movies for NES, but the series that would really bust the Star Wars gaming dam open was 1992's Super Star Wars. If the title didn't give it away, it was a Super Nintendo game, emulatable through the Wii's Virtual Console and with ports to PS4 and Vita, featuring some expanded options, saving, screen size, filters, and so on, which is how I'm playing for this video. Super Star Wars is primarily a run-and-gun shooter in the style of Contra or Metal Slug. In this aspect, it's largely standard. Light platforming, shooting in every direction but down. The only non-standard moves are sliding, done by holding down and forward then jumping, which is needed to get past a handful of obstacles, and high jumping by holding up while jumping. Luke starts with his weakest blaster, but hidden throughout the stage are power-ups which increase levels blaster up to 4 times until he dies, even between levels, something that's borderline necessary to deal with the game because holy fuck is it tough. Eventually, Luke also gets his lightsaber, close range and risky but highly damaging, as well as the ability to choose between Luke, Han, and Chewie, who all have moderately different properties. Chewie is slow but has a larger health bar by default, while Han is faster than Luke, and Luke himself has the lightsaber over the other two. Looping back to the game being hard, holy shit, this game loves to bully the shit out of you. Most enemies endlessly respawn, the screen will quickly get flooded with fast-moving enemies, especially when working with weaker blasters. This is really the main challenge of the game, it's very combat-focused. Not that platforming never happens, in fact a couple levels are mostly dedicated to it, and the game loves to be cruel here too, big knockback on hits, and what platforming there is tends to be extremely vertical. And when it's not, it really likes its instant kill death traps and blind jumps downwards. I hate when games that specifically have a button for panning the camera down still make you blind jump at times, but it truly was a different era. I think this makes the game sound kinda bad, but that's not my intention. The game is hard and mean, but outside of the blind jumps, the game plays incredibly well. It's fast-paced, aiming is a bit limited by being 8 or 7-way, but Luke can still jump while firing to align himself or dodge, plus jumping lets him move in midair, which is really fun combined with pretty high jumps. Enemy variety is great, with each having their own little quirks. Birds try to dive towards where Luke was, space Muslims, the sand people try to block your path when you get close, Jawas play hit and run with grenades, and all that is before getting to the bosses. This game is really fluid too, no response issues. It feels buttery smooth and runs really well for how good it looks. It doesn't hurt that the game is generous in its own ways. Every enemy will drop something, a drop of health, a life bar extender, extra time. Even when in trouble, there's always an out via farming. The game also features 3 difficulties, each progressively having more enemies that hit harder. The amount of shit this game throws at you makes it difficult to suggest not learning it on easy at the very least, especially because of how crucial hanging onto weapons is. The game is far too difficult quite often, even for games of its era. The levels themselves are fairly manageable, enemies don't hit excessively hard and always drop health. And while there is some bullshit like this, for the most part it's doable, assuming you manage to cling onto the gun power-ups and create your own checkpoints on the PS4 version. One major failure can lead to a cascading failure though. The level 1 gun is really shit. The bosses can also be something. None of them are undoable, but they certainly hit hard enough to kill an entire playthrough, because most of them have a checkpoint directly before them with no way to get a new gun upgrade. The game also has a few really impressive Mode 7 stages. Mode 7 is a graphical mode for Super Nintendo backgrounds that allows rotating, scaling, and other effects, which when paired with sprites can be used to create pseudo 3D areas. A good example of this effect in action is the original F-Zero. In Super Star Wars, these come in the form of extremely neat vehicle sections where the player is stationed in the center of the screen and can move freely around a wide map, shooting enemies and moving in any direction to complete objectives. These are obviously set aside in their own levels and are both brief and simple, but on a technical level they're simply stunning for what they managed to pull off. Alongside its extremely nice Mode 7 stuff, the game is generally impressive visually too. The fact that the characters who are portrayed by actors in the movie are instantly recognizable is a good testament to that. The game is colorful and despite taking place entirely on either Tatooine or the Death Star, manages to be extremely varied in stage design, with pretty sunsets over sun levels, detailed characters in the background of the cantina, and a very great recreation of the Death Star's interior later on. I also love the scale of the enemies, specifically bosses, all of whom are gigantic and detailed. The amount of animation is relatively slim for most enemies, but the bosses especially are really detailed and large, which helps sell them a lot. The cutscenes are also really nice. They're simple, limited animation, but very well drawn, and the little animation that is there is really good at telling the story of the movie. The opening crawl, as Star Wars staple, even makes it, seemingly using Mode 7, which makes it look spectacular even if the text looks a bit wonky as it goes further back. The story does deviate from the movie, although it's just to add gameplay. Obviously, Luke doesn't go and slaughter a bunch of sand people in Banthas, that's his dad's thing. He doesn't climb a Sandcrawler and fight a lava monster inside, or the ED-209 from RoboCop. A New Hope isn't an extremely action-heavy movie, so sometimes you just gotta take some creative liberties. The music is also noteworthy, primarily because the game was developed in part by LucasArts, which meant the soundtrack for the movie was fair game. I'm not gonna say that they're perfect, they're quite crusty in fact, but they are both accurate, recognizable, and well utilized. The first level of the game, Dune Sea, sets the standard for most levels. It's long, mostly flat, platforming is almost non-existent, and there are a lot of fucking enemies. The enemy variety is nice: birds in the sky, scorpions on the ground, big scorpions that split into more scorpions on death. Are big scorpions just two scorpions standing on top of each other in a trench coat? I think that this is the first appearance of Womp Rats visually, as far as I can tell. There might have been some comic experience. I don't know why they look like fucking gremlins on all fours, but you know, that's a first for the series, maybe. Unless someone proves me wrong. I think this stage is the format that works best for the game. Light, low-risk platforming, more focus on running and gunning. It's a Contra Metal Slug affair, and one that feels really good. The boss of the stage is the Sarlacc pit monster. Kinda surprising, given it was introduced in Return of the Jedi, the third movie. Perhaps they were unsure if they'd get to make a game of that. At the time of this game, the Sarlacc hadn't been updated to its new worst design with the beak, so it was imagined as a giant wormy thing. It's the least threatening boss, simply popping out of the ground and flailing its tentacles about. It's the only boss I like in the game, because following this they get excessively painful. The second stage is the first of the Landspeeder stages. The Mode 7 is impressive. Being able to fly it up during a boost is neat, and it's funny when it bounces upon coming down. The stage is simple: kill 12 Jawas to move on, shoot towers to get fuel for a boost, reach the Sandcrawler in the distance. It's neat that as you approach, the Sandcrawler gets larger and larger. Really neat trick. It's kinda bizarre that you can't rotate yourself without boosting, so if you run out you're really screwed if you don't happen to be facing where you want to go, but it's an okay change of pace. The Sandcrawler stages are indisputably the hardest in the game, despite coming right at the start. It's all downhill after these two, but man, something this obnoxious should be late game. It's worth noting that these stages are also bullshit, and they're just here to make some gameplay, but outside Sandcrawler feels like a stage name that's missing a word, and it is one of the only pure platforming stages in the game. And thank God for that, because this stage is fucking hell. The stage is entirely vertical. Jawas hang out on some of the platforms, but largely it's moving platforms, tight jumps, and one mistake is more or less a guaranteed restart. There's virtually no safeguards to falling, no lower platforms to catch you just tumble all the way back down. It's more stressful than it is difficult. The platforms are fairly slow and predictable, and there isn't much to harm you or knock you off, but holy hell it gets nerve-wracking near the top. Beyond that, I don't think this is the direction the game needs. The more basic run and gun stuff is much stronger than the slow and clunky platforming segments. Inside Sandcrawler isn't hard, it's just mean. It's a return to the more actiony stuff, and honestly, the enemies aren't really the problem. It's mostly Jawas who can be obnoxious, but not aggressively so. The main issue is all the death traps. The shock grid thing gives no indications that it needs to be slid past, if you even know that's an option that exists, and you soak up damage while learning that one. Jawas can throw grenades through walls, the spikes in the small platforming sections shred health, and before the boss, in the lava area under the Sandcrawler, there's a fucking trapdoor that falls directly into insta-death with virtually no warning. Speaking of lava pits, the boss, the Jawanko lava beast, which has some bizarre lore in that apparently it's worshipped by the Jawas and Tuskens as god, and they believe that Luke's grandma was its mate because Anakin, Luke's dad, slaughtered some Muslim people. Remember when Wikipedia used to have the fucking page about chairs? Jawanko's arena has insta-kill lava, but he doesn't actually do anything besides wait to die, he kinda just waggles around. Land of the Sand People, which may or may not be a racial slur, returns to a more standard run and gun format, but does feature some extremely stressful tiny platforms to hop over, including one that's randomly an auto-scroller that ends in a blind jump onto more tiny platforms. Despite the fact that the game allows you to pan the screen down, nobody considered putting them in view of even that. Completing this level gives Luke the lightsaber, better than the lower leveled guns, but risky to the point of being largely useless, with even a decent gun upgrade. It's followed immediately by the Land of the Banthas, a level that's virtually identical to the last, but with a bunch of enemy Banthas for some reason. They limply charge at Luke and die, also they're just big cows, so why are they doing this? The Mutant Womp Rat is the first asshole boss, but not exactly for the reason you'd expect. The gun keeps it from approaching, ever, but takes fucking ages to kill, while the lightsaber kills it fast, but the big bastard's long range makes it risky at the very least. I like the design, but tedium versus risk isn't an interesting gameplay choice. The second Landspeeder level is basically identical to the first, but requires more Jawa kills. It's still impressive, but literally just more of the same. I don't remember the part of A New Hope where on their way through Mos Eisley, Luke had to gun down hundreds of stormtroopers while using rolling barrels to get over pits of spikes, but here we are. This is the first stage where Chewbacca is playable. It's good run and gun gameplay with very little bullshit. Somehow the Cantina Fight, which I also really don't remember from the film, is the best level. It's the simplest level in the game in layout, literally a long flat stage with a nice background. What makes it is the variety of weird and unique enemies, like the weird bouncing vampires and the hyper-realistic Taz from Looney Tunes. The boss is neat if very badly made, being one of those guys from the board game that Chewie and C-3PO play on the Millennium Falcon. That said, this guy's a cunt. He stomps right up to Luke and either punches or swings his neck out, which he does seemingly randomly, and you kinda just gotta guess at the timing, jump, hold, shoot, and pray. This is basically the standard for the rest of the bosses, insofar as you kinda just jump, hold the shoot button, and hope for the best. Escape from Mos Eisley is another one of those bizarre levels that was just made for gameplay. The Millennium Falcon is at Mos Eisley, why would you escape on foot? The first half is basically the same as the first Mos Eisley stage, although you can play as Han if you'd like, but the back half just becomes chaos, a long downward sloping maze into caves, loaded with enemies, traps, and mines. It takes forever to get through, and enemies are far enough spaced out that it becomes a marathon. At the bottom is the worst boss in the game by far, the Hover Combat Carrier, a mess of a ship with turrets on each side, jet thrusters, and some kind of laser thing underneath, all of which chaotically spew shit all over. You gotta start blasting and pray you knock off everything on the left before you very quickly die, at which point you can slowly pick off the other shit before blasting the helpless carrier for the rest of the fight. It's basically RNG, and dying to it is full game resets, power-ups gone, and no way to go back for more because of the checkpoint placement. It's pretty poorly thought out. From here the game skips directly to the Death Star. Granted, a lot of what happens between Tatooine and the Death Star is pretty slow and relatively uneventful, but that's never stopped this game before. It's impressive that the Death Star levels have some variety. It would have been easy to just make them all the same. That said, the Death Star Hangar Bay is a slog. Run across a flat stage, shoot stormtroopers occasionally, jump over small pits. The TIE fighters leaving the hangar are just a nuisance to knock off a bit of health rather than anything interesting to play around. The Imperial Defense Droid, aka the robot from RoboCop that shreds the executive, returns to the comically easy bosses of the early game. It hops back and forth, and Luke just needs to crouch and shoot up at its weak point. The rest of the levels from here are all much more interesting, at least. Rescue the Princess takes place in the really nice looking detention area, and outside the basic running and gunning, it has giant crushers that Luke needs to slide through, which is kinda neat. Although there's really no progression to it, each one is the same shape and size. The detention guard boss kinda just hovers around and shoots. It's pretty easy to outdamage it and destroy it. The tractor beam core gives flashbacks to the outside of the Sandcrawler. Extremely long vertical platforming with little else. The platform's movements are predictable, but blasters and stormtroopers along the sides wear Luke down fast, and don't give nearly enough health to guarantee reaching the top. Although the boss seems weirdly non-functional. The core itself bounces up and down while shooting tons of fireball. Trying to fight it legit will end badly, but standing at the back of the upper left platform and holding the shoot button seems to slowly but surely annihilate it. There's a possibility I got good RNG, but it worked for me. The final level at least goes out with a bang, the actual Death Star, which begins with a really neat Mode 7 section, flying about the outside of the Death Star shooting down TIE fighters, before transitioning to a cockpit view inside the trench, shooting down TIEs and their bullets to stay alive in a weird Mode 7 light gun kind of thing, ending in a fight against Vader and launching the bombs in the Death Star. I love weird Mode 7 stuff, and even if the trench is annoying, it's kind of just like really slow, awkward, Super Nintendo light gun game. It doesn't feel like it's working well and the camera isn't wide enough to see everything going on. It's still a really good ending. It looks really nice. It's very impressive visually and probably the best way it could have been pulled off on a console like the Super Nintendo. I mean, I guess they could have just made it like a scrolling vertical shooter, but I don't know if that would have been better. Anyway, this is as good an excuse as any to rewatch A New Hope, my favorite Star Wars movie. There's also like book, comic, fucking whatever adaptions, but that's all too far out of the scope of this, so I'm just gonna ignore all that shit. A New Hope is a lovely movie. I think what works best is its simplicity. It's a very regular coming-of-age movie in a lot of ways. A simple farm boy with big dreams is given a chance to grow and shine. I notice more and more of the score. Beautiful moments like the Twin Sunset have wonderful music that carries the movie really well. I really have few complaints about it. The simplicity, the music, the amazing special effects, not just for their time, but a lot that holds up really well today, save a few of the X-Wing scenes. If anything is a little lacking, it's the action. I mean, the Obi-Wan Vader fight is really rough. I also love the characterization of the Empire. Not so much Vader, but the guys around him who think he's a weird weeaboo and make fun of him. It's a lot of fun. The world building is also fantastic, taking a world this weird and alien, especially at the time, making it familiar, recognizable, popular is a huge feat, and the movie does it without breaking the pace even a little. Super Star Wars is about as good as an adaptation could be at the time. The cutscenes tell the story well, and I mean, they extend Tatooine pretty heavily, but the only major action scenes left out are the Tantive 4 at the start, which would have been kinda hard to do given Luke and Han aren't there, and the Trash Compactor, which was apparently in the game but cut due to cartridge space. It's impressive that they condensed a relatively long movie into such a relatively small game. Super Star Wars is great, if nothing else, for the floodgates it opened. Beyond its own sequels, its success led to tons of great Star Wars games: Battlefront, Dark Forces, Jedi Knight, Force Unleashed, Rogue Squadron. It was proof that this was a space Star Wars could thrive in. Super Star Wars itself is fantastic. It looks great, captures Star Wars really well, especially with all the music, and it's fun as fuck. Fast-paced, frantic, good enemies that keep you on your toes. It's not on the level of the best Contras and Metal Slugs, but it's pretty damn close. My major complaint is the difficulty. The game just wants to make you miserable. If you die in Contra, you still have a usable weapon. The default gun is still good, plus alternate weapons are all only one level, and pretty frequently available. If you die in Super Star Wars, you're gonna be stuck with the worst weapon for a long fucking time, and you're gonna have to crawl back up to the higher tiers to have a usable gun. This is especially bad when paired with some really clunky bosses like the Combat Carrier, which can basically kill you by random number generator in seconds, then leave you right at the boss again with a shittier weapon, effectively ending the game. If the difficulty was toned down a good step or two, I'd call it an all-time great as it is. It's great but incredibly punishing. I recommend it, but definitely either emulate or play the PS4 or Vita versions and make your own checkpoints. I did my best to be reasonable with my checkpoints and not trivialize the game, and really enjoyed it even when it beat me down, but I also didn't get completely ruined by a loss. Had I not had this crutch, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot less.